Well, today we're going to talk about a proposal to make labor negotiations more transparent. And joining us is Palo Alto Vice Mayor Eric Filseth. Eric, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for asking me. Nice to be here.
So you were the lead author on this colleagues memo that the council approved on Monday. Can you tell us a little bit about just the genesis of the memo, where it stood for you when you first moved on it?
Well, I think this is first of all, it's something that a handful of other cities in the state have done. San Jose, notably one. I think there's been some discussion in the last. I mean, it's sort of ongoing, I guess, in the last year or so about sort of affairs of public concern being done behind closed doors, and I think this is one. And I think we're entering into a period in which the city needs to be very precise about its fiscal affairs. Costs are escalating here as they are all over the valley. Attracting and retaining quality people is an issue for governments and private sector all over the valley. And I think we just need to be very precise about that. And as a public agency, matters of public concern ought to be transparent. And this was one where we felt there wasn't enough of that. Essentially, I mean, what the proposal does is that we post formal offers and counter offers to an open website within 2 days of transmittal. Okay, so it doesn't change the bargaining process, right? It adds visibility at some key checkpoints, and I think that's important because if you look at how it's done today, essentially the whole process is done behind closed doors, and the first time the public ever gets a chance to see it is essentially when it comes to council for an up or down vote, and by that time, there's very little room for public comment and review to have any impact on the process.
And this is a process that's been going on for months, the negotiations.
Well, this is how it's done in most agencies in California, actually. Mm-hmm. I mean, for years and years and years.
Yeah.
But the negotiating process itself is a many months process.
Yeah, the negotiating process itself is a many months process, and it doesn't always reach a successful conclusion. Sometimes there's an impasse, and the parties go away for months at a time, and then come back later and work on it some more, and so forth. So it's a complicated thing.
Mm-hmm. And you guys are now starting to negotiate with all the unions. I know there's been a few closed sessions already, and another one scheduled for next week. Is the timing of this memo meant to coincide with kind of this current negotiation cycle, or is this something that you've been thinking about for a while?
No, it's really asynchronous. This is going to take us some time because the bargaining groups, we're going to have to work with the bargaining groups to craft an optimal policy here, right? It's not clear exactly how long it's going to take. There's no particular time frame that it says, by this negotiation is going to be part of and that negotiation. I think it's asynchronous to that. But again, I think this is generally a good governance measure, and the time is always right for good governance measures.
Were you inspired to do this by your work as chair of the finance committee? I mean, did it come out of your concern about the pension liabilities, or what was the genesis of this? Why now, and why
now?
you?
Yeah, perhaps a little bit. I think there were some discussions last year on some other topics where there were a couple of members of the public that raised issues of, and it wasn't financial, but it was issues of public concern, insufficiently transparent. And then, we went through the process of management raises this past year, right, for the council-appointed officers. And there was a fair amount of public feedback at the end of the process that said, wait a second, okay, is this done? Do we get to comment on this? And it was really decided in September. It arrived in front of the council for ratification, and I think in November. In fact, it might even have been on consent, right? And people were like, well, where's my opportunity to look at this and comment on it, right? And I said, well, they were kind of right? I mean, there wasn't one. And, this kind of information, again, there are some kinds of things that really need to be done, sequestered from public view for stuff associated with lawsuits, for example, okay? I don't think this is one of those things, okay? I think the bargaining process can remain intact, okay, and have more visibility, and I think it'll be good for everybody.
In order to come up with this particular proposal, you surveyed what other cities are doing?
We looked at a number of other cities around the state. So
What were some of the options that you looked at?
Yeah, there were a number of directions that we could have gone that we didn't feel were necessary. So San Jose, for example, had some language about specifically enjoining council members from, conducting compensation discussions with bargaining unit members outside of the process. I think they felt they had an issue with that, right? That hasn't been an issue in Palo Alto in my memory, so we didn't feel like. There are some much more extreme changes. There are agencies, and it's typically some school boards. And the Colorado School Board is the Colorado State Superintendent, right? Is one of them where it's a completely open process. So it's, one group presents the meetings are all noticed, they're held in public, they're recorded. One group presents their proposal, the other group presents their proposal, and so forth. And it's a real transformation of the bargaining process, right? Yeah, we didn't feel that there was a need for that at that time. We didn't think our bargaining process was broken in Palo Alto. I think it actually works fairly well, right? But
well, and those
we
would
wanted
have
to
been
solve
more
the transparency
difficult to probably, in the meet and confer process with the unions, that would have added some tension to that.
That's probably right, but probably rightly so. I mean, it's a fairly substantial change. I mean, the critics of that kind of process argue that, look, you're no longer negotiating with each other. Now you're, it's like a presidential debate or something like that, right? That's what the critics say. The supporters of those kinds of things say, well, it's the ultimate in transparency, and transparency is a public responsibility. And so, where the intersection of those things happens and what the optimization is, that's a long and complicated discussion, and the bargaining groups would rightly be a significant part of it.
There was another policy that you guys felt wasn't necessary this time, and this is the idea of having like an independent financial auditor. I think it was the Costa Mesa policy.
Correct.
Why do you think that that's not something that Palo Alto should do?
We all felt that the city's finance department is a strong department and has the capability of doing it in-house. And there were not issues of, we don't think they can do a good job of it. I should make a comment on here that I think is material, which is one of the provisions of this, and it's not like it's in the fine print, but it's, you could overlook it, is we're calling for an actuarial analysis on these things. So what's the impact on long-term pension and medical obligations? It turns out that that's technically a fairly difficult thing to do. Okay? The way agencies in California do that now, nearly all, is you have an outside actuarial consultant, which we do, and it takes some weeks, and it's expensive to work the numbers, and they have a staff of people to do that. Okay, and so when we did the long-term financial forecast back in December, we came up with one assessment of how big our liabilities were and our expenses were, assuming CalPERS had one rate of return, and a second one at a different rate of return. And that's a complicated calculation, right? The city is testing some new software. Software is becoming available that will do this kind of stuff for you. So the city is testing some new software that will be able to do that, okay? And I think that's a very important component of this, because I don't see, if we don't have that up and running internally, it's going to be very difficult for us to do actuarial analyses on bargaining proposals. Right? So I think that's an important component of this. I mean, there's a certain element of technology. So your finance department has to be able to do that. Okay? And it looks like our finance department will be able to do that. So we're working on that now.
Your proposal is, I think, silent on the question of whether data that goes in and is part of the negotiating process would be made public. Right now, the proposal, as I understand it, has the back and forth in terms of the actual proposals for the contract. But as I assume that there's a lot of material that is gathered by both the city and the unions that have to do with comparable pay in other communities,
right?
Place of residence of city employees, all kinds of data that is used as arguments in that negotiating process. Will you be supporting making all that public?
That's a good question. You know, the truth is, we didn't spend a lot of time thinking about that as we were coming up with this memo. And in general, all that information is publicly available. But it's a question
If
of
somebody knows to
amassing
ask
it,
for it.
amassing it, and
Or where it
curating
is.
it, and so forth. Is right. You know, I think that's one of the things that the Finance Committee needs to look at. So what the council did was direct the proposal to the Finance Committee. And the Finance Committee is tasked, one of its key tasks is coming up with exactly the nature of which information and what format it will be reported in and so forth. And I think that's probably one of the things that the Finance Committee is going to want to take a look at. Again, it's all public information, but it's a question of pulling it together and presenting it in a format that people can understand.
You know, I would agree with you that it's public information, but there are public agencies that make the case that anything that is part of the contract negotiating process is confidential until the process is complete. We have had this battle with the school board, and they basically deny access to any of the communications between the school district and their unions that it pertains to factual material,
Right.
saying that that's all confidential.
That is an avenue that we did not dig into. What we did say was that, you know, what we proposed to make public is, you know, formal
Right.
written offers. I mean, these are issues of fact, okay? What we didn't propose to make public was all the discussion that goes behind it. If there's informal offers and so forth, you know, again, if there's, I mean, the council is authorized to provide direction and feedback to the city negotiating teams in either open or closed session, right? And if it's in closed session, all that's supposed to remain confidential. Again, we wanted to take a very narrow and specific slice of this, which was the actual offers and counteroffers, which I think has great value. And the rest of it, the process of generating that information, you know, we didn't think there was a need to make all that public at this time, because now you're starting to get into the area of, you know, strategies and contract negotiations and so forth, which is part of this process and has been forever. I wasn't aware of what you just described, all the school board negotiations. So I probably shouldn't comment on it right now. I'd have to think about that.
But it makes me nervous hearing you.
It didn't come up in our discussions. Right?
Hearing you distinguish between formal proposals and informal proposals, with one being released and the other not,
Right.
raises all kinds of questions in my mind as you say that, because will this not then result in there just being a whole lot of informal proposals that take place during this process?
You know, it's a legitimate question. I think the answer is we just don't know. Right? We can look at the experience of other cities, right?
Well, does that happen currently, to your knowledge? That there
I'm sure.
are a lot of informal ideas that are trial balloons that never see print on paper?
I'm sure there are, right? I believe there are. Right? Again, I think you get into sort of operational challenges of, you know, how do you exactly,
Right.
where do you draw these lines
Yeah.
and so forth, right? I think we feel pretty good about this line, and we'll see how it goes.
In the Finance Committee meetings, will there be a possibility for changing where some of those lines are drawn? There is another option for at least having some sort of verbal report when these counteroffers and offers are.
Yeah, San Jose does that, and we thought that wasn't necessary at this time here. But the short answer to your question is yes. I mean, the whole thing is going to come back to council for approval or not approval and final review. So.
One of the parts of the motion is also kind of directing staff to meet and confer with the unions and kind of get their buy-in to this before anything is implemented. And I know that has yet to happen, but in the early weeks of this memo being released, have you guys heard any concerns about this proposal, either from your legal counsel or the unions about
Or
it?
did you reach out to any union officials as you developed this proposal?
I did not. Okay. It's not incumbent on council to do that kind of stuff.
Right.
That's really a function of the city.
Right.
My understanding is that that city staff notified the bargaining groups that something like this would be coming forward slightly in advance. And I think, you know, there was a lady from the SEIU that spoke the other night and said, you know, we look forward to reviewing this and collaborating on the discussion, and I think that's exactly the right process. I mean, they are part of this as well. Right?
So to the meet and confer issue, can you, and maybe we need a lawyer here to do this, but can you describe exactly what that entails and whether, and at what point the city could impose this on its bargaining units?
You're beyond my span of domain knowledge on that one. I don't know.
Okay, because I won't tell what my understanding is, because if it's wrong, then we're spreading bad information. So I won't speculate.
All right.
Right. I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
I think we have, I mean, the city has a team of people that are very experienced in this.
I think the last
Any
time
more
the
than I
city imposed it, I don't know what the exact rules are, so I don't want to speculate either, but last time the imposition happened was when both sides rejected the last best and final offers, and I think when it gets down to that last best final phase, if that doesn't go through, then that
Yeah,
becomes an
I
option.
think ultimately the public agency can impose things as long as they followed the process of conferring with the unions and giving them an
And
opportunity.
I don't see anything in this memo that's going to change that process. Right? I mean, I think that process can still happen exactly as it does today, with or without this memo. The only thing this does is provide public information.
Eric, you told us about how you came upon this idea. I'm curious, when you craft a colleagues memo, how do you gain colleagues to join in on the memo?
Well, Councilmember Tanaka and I had been talking about this for some time, and then we started talking to the others, and they had suggestions and input on this, and so at the end of the day, it was a team effort.
So you and Greg Tanaka then kind of spread the idea around, or you were
Yeah, we batted it back and forth.
with specific council members, or?
Did we violate the Brown Act? No.
Well, I think it is,
No, we were
It's
careful.
curious.
in the
Again,
interest of
again,
transparency, which is what this is all about.
This is an area, yeah, in the interest of transparency, this is an area where, you know, it's very important to be precise on how you do things. And we took, you know, we were always careful to be precise, but if anything, we were even more careful this time.
Well, I think it's a curiosity. It's not, I don't think it's that there's any suspicion about the Brown Act. I think, though, colleagues' memos are not well understood, I think, by the public, and
It's been education for me, too.
you know, and some interpret what you did at the council meeting as adopting these things rather than
Right.
simply. I mean, the staff is not waiting on this. This is a colleagues' memo, and the point of it is to determine whether there's sufficient interest in devoting some staff resources to developing the idea further.
Well, the staff actually does have some input on these before it goes to council, because it goes to staff for an assessment of resource impacts. And so staff had seen it before
No,
it
I
came to
didn't mean to
council.
suggest that it was a secret to them, but I think more generally, when you're assembling one, or I guess you need 3 council members for a colleague memo to go to the council?
I don't know whether it's 2 or 3. It might be 2.
Okay, well, when you're going
I
through
should,
that.
I should know that as vice mayor, I suppose.
When you're going through that process, what is the strategy or thinking? I mean, and how do you decide? Use this as an example if you wish. It sounds like it originated with you and Greg Tanaka, but then you obviously decided, let's go talk to these 2 additional council members. Can you just explain to our viewers sort of how that happens and what your thinking is? Why did you pick those 2 in particular to join you?
I don't really know. I thought, we thought, oh yeah, that's a smart person that could have some useful input on this.
So does a political consideration go into it, so that you're reaching across the aisle, so to speak, or balancing the people that are putting this forward? Not really.
No, not in this case. I'm not very good about thinking about that kind of stuff anyway, right? So,
But it didn't need
no,
to
I
be
would-
4
no, I
council
wouldn't say
members
so.
either.
It didn't. No, it didn't.
Yeah.
But I think, those who allege that there are splits on the council, between me and Greg Tanaka, a lot of people would argue that's one of the big splits. Right? But I think he and I both
I think you're both the biggest fiscal hawks.
I think we both have a lot of
these
things
issues.
I mean, this is true of the whole council. I mean, with everybody in council, there's a number of things we agree on and a number of things we don't agree on. And so I'm sure it's not a Boolean kind of thing.
Were you expecting the unanimous support that occurred?
I was.
Yeah.
I think it's a good governance measure that's good for everybody.
And I just think that every colleague's memo is so different that some are incredibly political, and this one was not one of them, as you can tell by the unanimity. I think if you consider like Adrian's housing memo or Tom's rent control memo, I feel like the rules are very, very different from soliciting like co-signees or whatnot.
Right.
But yeah, it was striking how quick the conversation about such a huge issue, how quick the conversation was after 3.5 hours were spent kind of debating the number of employee permits in one area of downtown.
Well, they finally got to an agenda item that everybody could agree on. Right?
Yeah,
Sure is a relief.
yeah. So what is the path forward for this? So is this something the Finance Committee is going to take up like in the next month or two, or is this kind of like part of a more long-term?
Well, I hope so. It has yet to be agendized on the Finance Committee agenda. I think, but I expect it will. I think we're going to. I mean, the city manager at the appropriate time of, and his guidance on this is we're going to follow. Right, it's going to initiate the meet and confer discussions with a number, maybe all the bargaining groups in the city, and we'll see how it moves forward. And then at some point, the consensus out of Finance Committee will come back to council for further discussion.
Do you know what the reaction has been to in these other communities that you looked at, how the unions have responded to this, and what the backstory was on how contentious it was when these measures were adopted, and how it's worked?
I don't. Right. There was some controversy in some cities in Southern California a number of years ago that did some of these things that weren't exactly the same as what we did too. I'm not aware of. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, it's worked fairly well in San Jose, which is San Jose, the earth has not opened up, and San Jose has fallen into the cracks. Right. In fact, I think San Jose has made a lot of progress. I mean, San Jose has some really serious challenges on the fiscal front, and it predated the Chuck Reed ballot initiative. Right. And I think that was a response to stuff that had been brewing for a long time. San Jose has, has had some serious challenges to work through, and I think they are, and I think they made a lot of progress, and I think I'm not. I've heard nothing that that this was a problem for them. Maybe the opposite.
I think we're going to need to wrap it up for today. Eric Filseth, thank you again for
Thank you very much
coming
for
and
having me.
reviewing this issue with us. We look forward to seeing what the council does with it.
Super. Thank you.
That's it for this week. You can follow Behind the Headlines on YouTube, youtube.com/PA Weekly. Subscribe to us below or like us. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and always on paloaltoonline.com. We'll see you next week.